And the Psalms, I said that last week, I prayed that as we go through this summer, that it would be nourishment to our souls. Now, it's not a 150-week series. It's a 9-week series, so we're only doing 9 chapters, not 150. But maybe an encouragement for you is to take time this summer to read through the Psalms, to meditate on them. You can have plenty of time all summer to read the 150 Psalms, I believe in you, and meditate on them, think on them, wrestle on them. But as it's nourishment to our souls, it's because we live in modern times. Right? It's called modernity the last couple of 100 years, but we live in modern times where what we have really done is separated, more so than any other point in human history, we've separated the physical from the spiritual. We are all very much empiricists, which means we rely on our 5 senses. We take in the world mainly in the physical. What we can see, what we can hear, what we can touch, what we can taste, what we can feel. And yet we are spiritual beings as well. When God created us, it says He formed us from the dust and then He breathed the breath of life into us. We are as beings physical and spiritual. And in these modern times in which we live, we have very much elevated the physical and downplayed the spiritual. And we need, and the church can help with this, to reunite these together. And as we read the Psalms, these are poems. You may read a psalm and think, man, I'm not quite sure what is being said there. And as we'll go through today, the Psalms are much more about what we might feel more than what we might learn. Now, I do pray we're going to learn some stuff through the Psalms, but as poems, as poetic, it should cause us, stir in us something to feel. And so I pray that it's nourishment to our souls this summer. Before we jump into our psalm today, I just want to do a quick recap of the 4 types of psalms. If you can remember from last week, there's 4 main styles, main types of psalms. The first type, of course, is wisdom. That's what we looked at last week, the wisdom psalms. Right? Wisdom is essentially connected in some ways to the Proverbs. It's little nuggets of wisdom. Here's advice. Do this and this will happen, or don't do this and this won't happen. It's advice, it's wisdom. The next type is lament, and this is in fact where we'll be today. A lament psalm is a response, a reaction to something that has gone wrong, something that has happened in the world that is wrong, that has caused you an emotional reaction, typically sadness. And it's a, oh Lord, how long, or oh Lord, why? It's a lament. And as I said last week, this is not something that we're good at. We want to quick to have an answer and to know what to say and to move on when sometimes we need to pause and lament. The third kind is the imprecatory psalms. This is perhaps the most difficult to understand, but the imprecatory is a psalm kind of birthed out of anger. Now, it's an honest psalm with the Lord, as all of these are, but it's anger. Lord, this has happened. Why did this happen? It happened to us. Can you do it to them? They've hurt us, this other nation. Lord, I want you to hurt them. This is some of the honest psalms. And like I said last week, we are much better suited to give our anger to God than to try to hold on to it ourselves. God can take it. God can handle it. And when you are angry and you don't know what to do with it, give it to the Lord. Share with Him. Be honest with Him. He can take it. When we hold on to it ourselves, it tends to rot us from the inside out. And then the last kind of psalm, the main type of psalm, is a psalm of thanksgiving. These are the praise and worship songs. These are the ones you can pull from the Psalms and sing them aloud for the church. And it's praising God for who He is and for what He's done. And this is, if you remember, Jesus borrows this. And again, don't forget, the Psalms are the prayer book of the Jewish people. This would have been Jesus' own prayer book as He grew up. And when Jesus gives us the Lord's Prayer, He doesn't start off by saying, Lord, God, here's what I'm asking for. Here's what I need. Here's what I want. Here's my list. No, He starts by saying, right, our God who art in heaven, hallowed be Thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done. It begins as a prayer of thanksgiving. It's a good place for us to start before we move into our list. And Jesus teaches that. And so today we're in Psalm number 4. Now, before I read Psalm number 4, as a reminder, this is a lament psalm. And now lament psalms are not all sad the whole time, top to bottom, front to back. Every verse is sad. No, it doesn't work that way. But there are portions where you see as the author, the writer of the psalm, is responding to something going on. And it requires us to know a little bit of the context to maybe know what's going on, what they are responding to. So Psalm number 4 today is written by King David. Many people know King David. He's a pretty popular person in the scriptures. But King David reigned as king over Israel around 1000 BC to 960 BCE, just to give you a frame of reference. Now, King David grew up as a shepherd, was the youngest son of Jesse, and then he came into power and rose to be king. Yet there's a lot more to David's story that maybe we are unfamiliar with, and we're not going to go into all the detail, but I want to let you in on what's leading him to write this Psalm number 4. David has a son named Absalom. Now, Absalom has grown up and rebelled against King David. Now, maybe you can relate in your life, you or someone you know, you struggle with children that you've raised that have wandered off, have gotten off track, are not listening to you, are not on the same page with you. Maybe it's a tense relationship that you have, or maybe it's someone that you know. This is what King David is going through. Absalom is essentially, he's grown up, he's rebelled against the king, he's left Jerusalem, and now he's returned to Jerusalem, and there's this turmoil, this kind of jockeying for position, so much so, when you can read this in 2 Samuel 15, that King David actually flees Jerusalem. It's to that level of this tense relationship with his son. And there's other men that have become loyal to him over and above King David. All this turmoil, all this emotion that he's struggling with leads him to write this psalm. So with all that being said, Psalm number 4. And as a reminder, this is poetic. These are poems. We're not going to go through this as we typically do and pull out every single word and every single verse. No, what is the word picture being shown to us? What are we led to feel, and what can we learn from that? So let's read together Psalm number 4. The prescript there, but you won't see on the screen, says, "To the choir master with stringed instruments, a psalm of David." So this perhaps could be a psalm that is sung to stringed instruments. So not Ricky, but John. Psalm number 4. "Answer me when I call, O God of my righteousness. You have given me relief when I was in distress. Be gracious to me and hear my prayer. O men, how long shall my honor be turned into shame? How long will you love vain words and seek after lies? But know that the Lord has set apart the godly for himself. The Lord hears when I call to him. Be angry and do not sin. Ponder in your own hearts on your beds and be silent. Offer right sacrifices and put your trust in the Lord. There are many who say, 'Who will show us some good?' Lift up the light of your face upon us, O Lord. You have put more joy in my heart than they have when their grain and wine abound. In peace I will both lie down and sleep. For you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety." Psalm number 4, written by King David, surrounding the circumstances of his son Absalom, who has rebelled against him. And he begins this psalm by crying out to God. Right, verse 1, "Answer me when I call." Have you ever started a prayer that way? Sometimes we're very timid with God, and it's like, "God, I don't want to bother you right now. Are you busy? But if it's okay, maybe later, could you come back and get with me? I need you to..." No, King David here says what? "Answer me, God." Again, the Psalms, I want this to help us. The Psalms are honest. It is okay to be honest with God. He's going through something. He's like, "God, answer me. Answer me when I call, O God of my righteousness." And then he says something important. He says, "You have given me relief when I was," past tense, "in distress." This is a common theme throughout the scriptures, and it's important for us to understand today. God is often seen as faithful because of the promises and faithfulness of what he has had and done in the past. King David says, "Lord, I need you to come through for me in the future as I move ahead, because I'm not sure of this rocky road that I'm on. But hey, you have given me relief when I was in distress." I believe it. Oftentimes when we see God's name in the Old Testament, it'll say, Yahweh, but then comma, "the one who saved you from Egypt." Yahweh, the one who freed you from slavery. Yahweh, the one who delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians. It's a reminder of, hey, this is who I am, God, who has freed you, my people, from the land of Egypt. This is the story of the people of God in Exodus leading up to Moses. God is constantly reminding us, and we need to remind ourselves of the faithfulness he has done as we look ahead, and that's what David's doing. And so for us in the same way, you need to look back. Can you look back in your own life and see, here's where God has come through. Here's where God has provided. Here's where God has guided and directed my steps. And because of his faithfulness, then I'm going to trust in his faithfulness to come. This is a very biblical principle. But yet maybe for you struggle in this area because you look back and maybe you're struggling to find that place where God did come through, where God did provide. Maybe it's fuzzy for you. You can't quite see it. And because of that, it causes you to struggle with faith in the future. I'm not going to assume today that we all have these great God stories in our past. But perhaps maybe God is there working and maybe we haven't noticed. You know, I've shared this story several times here before, but if you're new, this will be new to you. When I graduated high school, I moved off to college and I quickly failed out. That's right, your pastor failed out of college. Now, many of you know this. I've shared this before. I went and I moved about an hour and a half away, went off to the big state school there. I lived in South Carolina at the time. And it wasn't necessarily the class, the grades and stuff, the assignments. I always did pretty good in school, but it was my maturity. I wasn't ready to grow up. I didn't go to class enough. I didn't do what I was supposed to do. And at the end of the semester, the end of the year, I had failed out of college. Now, I had to move home. This is in great shame. Right? No 18-year-old wants to move back home once he's moved out and to go to college, to grow up and be a man and take on the world. And here I was forced to move back home. So I moved back home while all my friends remain at school and doing their other things and living their lives. And I was in great shambles. Now, there was one bright spot in my life during this time. Nothing seemed to be going right. I was off track, but yet when I moved home, I got connected with my best friend, who happened to be a very pretty girl. This is now my wife, Jessalyn. And we started dating. Now, I firmly believe, and I'm not a prophet, I'm not Jesus, so I can't say for certain, but I firmly believe that had I not failed out of college and been forced to move back the hour and a half home where Jessalyn was, she's one grade younger than I don't believe that we would have ended up together. And that's difficult to say as I look back. But had I just stayed in school and done what I was supposed to do and gone to the next grade and the next year she would have finished high school and then she went off to her own university and gone to her college and our paths would have just kind of done like this, further and further apart. And I highly doubt that we would have ever actually ended up together. All the blessings of dating together and marriage together and kids together and ministry together, this beautiful journey and blessing of life that I've experienced the last 15, 17 years since we've been dating, might have all been missed. But yet this is where now as I look back, I see that when I was at my worst, when I was making failures, that God was rather working behind the scenes, leading me to where I actually needed to be. God is the one who can take something broken and turn it into something beautiful. And if I'd stayed in school, I'd have ended up marrying some other dumb girl. Who knows, right? I don't even want to think about it. And she would have married some other guy. I just want to beat that guy up already. But this is God working in a way that is unexpected. And you might say, well, that's just happenstance. It just worked out that way. And no, I believe this is God's hand working and guiding my life, leading me to a blessing that provided now blessing after blessing after blessing of life together and kids together and ministry together and this incredible journey that we've been on that I would have missed. And God was faithful to be there. And so as I look to where God has provided in my past, I trust God as we continue to do now of what is ahead, what is before us. There's so much unknown, right, that's ahead. But we believe God can provide this way when we know and can look and find where he's provided this way. Verse number 2, David turns his attention. He starts off talking to God, and then he now addresses some men. In fact, it's the word men there is men of rank. So this is men in the military, men that serving in the court in some way. This is soldiers. These, in fact, are the very men that are now faithful or potentially faithful to his son Absalom rather than to him. And so as he writes this down, he writes here in verse number 2 and 3, O men, how long shall my honor be turned into shame? How long will you love vain words and seek after lies? But know that the Lord has set apart the godly for himself. The Lord hears when I call to him. What stands out to me as we read these two verses is this line here from verse 2. How long will you love vain words and seek after lies? This is what David writes about these men that have become unfaithful to him. How long will you love vain words and seek after lies? David's calling these men out to say, hey, you're hearing from someone that doesn't have your best interest, but you're believing these vain words about yourself rather than honesty that you need to hear. I want us and desire for us to be a relational church. You hear us say this often. It's the mission statement of our church, right? To make disciples of Jesus in relationship, right? It's on our website. It's out there in the hall. To make disciples of Jesus in relationship. And that's not my good idea. That's Jesus' idea. We see Jesus model that himself as he leads in his ministry. He's in relationship with his disciples. And so we want to be a church that follows after Jesus, not just his message, but his methods. This is why, as a church, we have small groups. Now, there are many churches that have small groups, life groups, home group, Bible study, Sunday school, pick another word, attempting at least to say they're about relationship. But I want us to know that we are not a relational church simply because we have a small group. Small groups are not the destination. Hey, we got in small group, it's all good now. No, small groups I want us to see are the vehicle by which we can have healthy relationships, ideally leading us to be better and better disciples, followers, representatives of Jesus. And if we are to be a church that is relational, it means that we're going to have to be honest with one another. There's going to be a time as you get to know someone where you don't quite see eye to eye. You have a disagreement. They said something that you didn't like. They've done something that you didn't approve of. They disapproved of something you had done. They interpret Scripture in a different way than you. There's a disagreement there. And if we want to be a relational, honest church, it means that we're going to have to be bold to step into those moments of conflict. Sadly, as I've served in the church many years, most people, again, this is adults, most people when they have some type of conflict with the church, the way they respond is they simply bounce. They leave. They had a run-in with the pastor or someone on staff or another person or a small group leader, and rather than dealing with the conflict, they just disappear. You don't see them again. And they're like, no, it's all fine. I actually just didn't like the chairs. They'll make up something. I didn't like the music. When really there's conflict there that they would rather avoid. Many of us, if we're honest, can struggle in this area. When you disagree with someone, we can be mature adults and step into the conflict to handle it, address it, talk through it, that we might be better on the other side. In fact, deeper on the other side of the conflict, rather than avoiding it. And addressing conflict is being honest. We need people to be honest with us. It says it this way in Proverbs. King Solomon writes Proverbs. It's the next book of the Bible. Proverbs chapter 27, verse 6. One verse says this: faithful are the wounds of a friend. Profuse are the kisses of an enemy. Faithful are the wounds of a friend. Profuse are the kisses of an enemy. We, guys, need our friends at times to wound us. We need people in our lives that are willing to be real with us and to tell us the things that maybe we don't want to hear, but that we need to hear. Not just believing these vain words, these vain lies, but people that are honest with us, that tell us what we need to know, what we need to hear. Wounds from a friend, the Bible says, is much better than kisses from an enemy. An enemy who just wants to tell you all the good. Here's the good stuff, and it's all good, no conflict, we're okay, and there's not a deep relationship there. Right? There's times after service on Sunday where someone will come to me and say, hey, great word today, great sermon, I appreciate that. And let me just tell you guys, I love that. I'm a new preacher, I'm a young preacher, I've got a lot of learning and growing to do, but I love the encouragement that I get. So thank you for that. But there's also times where honest people might come and say, I didn't really get that one. What did you mean by this? Because I don't think you were clear on that point. Help me understand this one. This one wasn't my favorite. I need that too. I need honesty in my life. And this is not just about sermons. I need this in my whole life. And we all do, for people to be honest with us, to help us take the next steps that we need, as our friends are the ones who may see our blind spots and help us to take the next steps in our life. This truly is what it means to be relational. Not just that we go to group and say, hey, I'm in group, but I'm never going to say anything that's going to cause a stir. No, we want to be honest. And as we said last week, the Psalms ultimately lead us to be honest with God, which in turn allow us to be honest with one another. If we put on a facade for God, pretend like all is good, and I don't want to disturb him or bother him, or he can't handle this, then we actually usually do that with people. If we can be honest with God, we can be honest with people. And we need, as a relational church, we need to be able to be honest with one another. Faithful are the wounds of a friend. Don't cut and run if someone says something difficult to you. Maybe lean into that. And maybe believe that maybe God was leading that person to say that very thing to you. Continuing on, verse number 4. This may be the most well-known of the verses in this passage. Maybe this is what stood out to you the most. We'll see why in a moment. He writes, be angry and do not sin. Maybe you want that verse to just end with be angry. Be angry, period. Exclamation point. No, it continues. Be angry and do not sin. I believe we do have an anger problem. Not just our country, but I feel sadly, in fact, that many Christians have been sucked into this anger as well. Many of us are angry. What makes you angry? Maybe the question better is who makes you angry? See, I believe we live in a very divided time. I talk about this from time to time. Where most of us are pulled from the left and on the right. To be a Republican or a Democrat, a progressive or a conservative, we got to lean and pick one, and we're constantly fed day in and day out from our social media or our cable news channel of just what we need to be angry about. Here's why you need to be angry. Here's why you need to be scared. Here's why you need to be mad. Here's who you need to be mad at. We are told this, guys, hours after hours per day, per week. And it builds and builds. And if we're not careful, it causes us to respond and be people, as I've called before, an army of angry and grumpy Christians. Many people are sadly much more discipled by their cable news channel than they are by Jesus. But now, is it a sin to be angry? No. If you remember back during the series of Epiphany, Jesus got angry as well. It's okay to be angry. He tells us here, be angry. But do not sin. Sin there, the word hamartia, means to miss the mark. And when we miss the mark, it means that we're not loving the way that God has designed us to love one another. God is love, as John writes in his letter. To miss the mark is to not love one another well. So if we're angry, which it's okay to be, if I'm angry with them, I also need to what? Have patience with them. Can I be angry? Yes. That means I still need to have patience with them. If I'm angry, that means I still need to be kind to them. I'm not coming up with this definition of love myself. This is Paul's definition in 1 Corinthians 13. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love doesn't insist upon its own way. Love keeps no record of wrongs. If we want to be angry, let's stop bringing up their past again and again and again to serve our own purposes. Be angry, but do not sin. I love the way David writes it here at the end of the verse. He says, be angry and do not sin. Ponder in your own hearts on your beds and be silent. He says, if you get mad, go to your room and shut up. That's what King David says. Sounds like my mom. Ponder in your own hearts on your beds and be silent. Now, maybe this stood out to you because we see this in the New Testament. Now, in the book of Ephesians, before we read, Paul writes this to the church in Ephesus. Now, the church has now grown. It's not just the Jewish people in Jerusalem. It's grown across the Roman Empire. And Ephesus is a large city, probably the second largest in the New Testament, second only to Rome. Ephesus is a great big city. It's a pagan city, a Gentile city. Not a lot of Jews there in Ephesus. And so as the church begins there, they're dealing with quite a bit of conflict. They have a statue to Zeus and Demeter and Dionysus and Roma and Caesar. It's where the Artemis cult begins, which is actually a big part of the New Testament that Paul addresses. There's this worship of other gods and goddesses, and Jesus is making his way into this place through the church, and Paul has to address much conflict with this very multifaceted family, this diverse family of God. And he writes this to the church in Ephesus in chapter number 4. Paul says, therefore, and you're like, man, you're starting a verse on therefore. I am. And you can go read the rest of Ephesus if you want, Ephesians, but let's start with verse 19. Therefore, or wait, I lost my place. Where we go? 25. Therefore we are, having put away falsehood, let each one of you speak the truth with his neighbor, for we are members one of another. Be angry and do not sin. There it is. He quotes it from the Psalms. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and give no opportunity to the devil. Paul writes to this church in Ephesus, a very diverse church that is trying to figure out their way of what it means to follow Jesus as a now pagan culture seeking to be faithful and loyal to Jesus and not Caesar. Remember, for them to say Jesus is Lord was a highly contested statement, not just spiritual fluff that we might say. No, to say Jesus is Lord was to say, and Caesar is not. This is a very political statement for them to say. They're learning all of these things. And Paul, in the midst of this, writes to address the church and says, hey, don't forget, guys, we are all together. We're all unified. He says, we're members one to another. The way I live and hold myself impacts the way you live. And the way you live impacts the way I live. We are accountable one to another. This is important for us to remember and consider. We're not just islands isolated and however I live doesn't impact the ones around me. No, my life impacts my wife and my kids and my church and my family and my small group and my neighbors. The way I live impacts other people. And the same is true for you. Paul says, hey, we're members one to another, so be faithful. Don't forget that. And then he goes into this very quote from Psalms. Be angry and do not sin. Let's not forget, for Paul, grew up a young Jewish boy, the Psalms were his prayer book as well. He carried around the Psalms and read them as often as he could. The Psalms were his own prayer book. And so as he's writing this letter to the Ephesians, he's going, I got something I want to say. I can't quite put it into words. Oh yeah, Psalm 4. This is what I want to say. Be angry and do not sin, he quotes David from 1,000 years earlier. Now he changes a little bit. He says, do not let the sun go down on your anger. Be angry and do not sin. How do we do that? Don't let the sun go down on your anger. In essence, he's saying, don't let sin linger in your life. Don't let it linger. Don't let it hang around. When that happens, it gives the devil a foothold. It gives the devil an opportunity to drag us down when we let anger live and stay in our hearts. This goes back, like I said, to being honest in relationship. If someone does something to us that we don't like, we can get angry about it and we can address it with them, or we can just pull back and pretend as though it's all good, nothing ever happened, I'm fine. And then a few weeks go by, months go by, they say something again that you don't like. And secretly, quietly in your own mind, you're building a case against them, in fact, building a wall between you and them to where you actually begin to grow to hate them, have animosity towards them, and they are unaware. This is not a healthy relationship. When we have conflict, when there is anger in our hearts, we step into it to talk through it that we might be more healthy on the other side. This is what Paul is saying to this church in Ephesus because that's what they're struggling with. Hey, don't build up a case. Don't build up a case of anger against someone that's not helpful to you or them. In fact, don't let the sun go down on your anger, because when you let anger in your heart sit still and linger and hold on, it gives the devil a chance to just pull you down. It pulls you into the very sin that you're trying to avoid, pulls you into hate, pulls you into animosity, pulls you into anger leading unto sin. So for us, when we're angry, we have to have healthy relationships enough to step in. If I'm angry with my wife about something, I can't just pretend it's all good. It's just going to get worse. If I'm angry with a friend, I can't just pretend it's all good. It's going to get worse. We have to step into it. This is a challenge for all of us to not cut and run, to lean in. Back to the Psalms, verses 5 through 7. I want to jump through this quickly. He says, offer right sacrifices and put your trust in the Lord. There are many who say, who will show us some good? Lift up the light of your face upon us, O Lord. You have put more joy in my heart than when their grain and wine abound. We're looking for the good. David writes, who will show us some good? This could be the whole sermon for today, in fact. We're all big picture coming in. We're looking for the good. Now, we may define good in different ways as different people, but ultimately we're not looking for harm to befall upon us. We're looking for the good of life. We're looking for the good. We're looking for goodness. And today I want to tell you the truth that God is the source of goodness. He says, Lord, you give me more joy than they have when all of their grain and wine abound. He's connecting them back to the harvest time when they have all this stuff. Now, many times for us, as we seek goodness, we have it come through in our possessions, in our stuff, in our gifts, in our blessings. And we're thankful for this good because these are good. And many times that can lead us astray, in fact. There's some churches, in fact, some denominations that focus so heavily on the gifts Lord, I want the gift of prophecy, the gift of tongues, the gift of healing, the gift, and we seek after the gifts, sometimes even to the detriment of not paying homage to the giver of the gifts. The giver of the gifts, God, is always greater than the gifts themselves. And every pleasure under sun that we can have, all goodness comes from God. And if we seek after just the gifts, we can tune out the very giver of these gifts. And I want us today to know that it's not about the gifts, it's about the giver. It's not just the blessings that we have. We thank the Lord for them, but we must be able to find goodness solely in the presence of God. That God loves us, that God cares for us, that God himself, he is goodness. God, as I say, often desires our wholeness in life. God is good, and if we can find the goodness in God, that these blessings may come. But the blessings aren't the source of the goodness, it is God. The blessings aren't the end of the road. The God is the ultimate goodness providing in our lives. And then I want to close here with the last verse, verse number 8. In peace I will both lie down and sleep. I love that Jesus takes the nap on the boat. Remember that story? The world's going crazy. Maybe look around the world and it's like, the world is crazy right now. They were in the middle of the Sea of Galilee and waves and winds were tossing. And what's Jesus doing? He's in the back napping. Jesus can bring peace amidst chaos that is around you. Don't forget. David says this 1,000 years before Jesus is born. In peace I will both lie down and sleep. For you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. Let me say this to you today. To follow the Lord is safe. To follow the Lord is safe. Maybe you hear that and you're like, that doesn't sound right. To follow the Lord is safe. That's true, but it doesn't necessarily look like the safety that we may have come accustomed to. It doesn't necessarily look like the safety that the world calls safe. In fact, to follow the Lord is going to lead you on a wild and crazy adventure. Believe you me. And it's not always going to look safe, but in fact, it's the safest place you can be. A few years ago, almost 3 years ago now, my wife and I made the decision after a long time of prayer that the Lord was leading us to plant a church on the other side of the country. And we moved from South Carolina, Charleston there on the coast, all the way here to Castle Rock, Colorado. And in fact, just to add to it, we moved in July of 2020 when the world was upside down and COVID-19 was ravaging everyone and the world seemed very uncertain. This is when we loaded up the van and the Penske and put our 1-year-old and 3-year-old and 5-year-old and 7-year-old in the van and drove 30 hours across the country to a place that we had never lived before. In fact, to a place where we didn't know anyone. We knew one pastor that lived in Parker, and we had heard of one pastor that lives here, but we never met him. That was the extent of who we knew in this area. Now, is that safe? The world might say, and in fact many did, hey, are you sure that you want to do that? Are you sure this is the right time? Are you sure that you want to uproot and move away from all that is safe? It's where our family was, our friends, our community. It's where our church was. All this is where we were, yet we believed God was leading us to plant a church in Castle Rock, Colorado. And there's 100 details that go behind that, but the Lord was leading us here. And we knew in our hearts that this was in fact God's will for our life. Therefore, this was the safest place we could be. Even though it looked crazy to anyone else, sometimes even to ourselves, this was the safest place that we could be. God was leading us to come out here and start a church, and we have had to trust Him every step of the way ever since. And it's God's faithfulness in the past, like we said before, that leads us to trust God's faithfulness in the future. And when we stay faithfully in the will of God, it's going to look a little crazy to some people. It's going to look a little unsafe to some people. It's going to be a little scary to some people. In fact, a little scary to you. But I promise you, the truth of God's word tells us that when we follow God's will with our life and take the step that He has led us in, it is the safest place we can be in all of the world. even when it doesn't look like it to someone else. Following the Lord is safe, not because trials don't come and not because it's not fearful. No, following the Lord is safe because it's right where He has called us to be. It's simply that. God's goodness is ever present in our lives, and we have trusted Him thus far, and we're going to trust Him still to go. Meadows Church is no mega church by any stretch of the means yet. Who knows if we ever will be? Our desire is to be a church that does things the right way. And we're going to entrust the growth of the church to the Lord. I say that often. And so we know that God has led us here, but He didn't just drop us off and then go back. God has remained with us. And every week after week after week, as we've made friends of a lifetime, as we've met new people, as we've seen people come to know Jesus and be baptized, as we've worshiped the Lord together, as we've made an impact in this community, God is building this church one day at a time, one person at a time. And it's the safest place that we can be. And so for you, as we wrap up today, what is that thing that God is leading you to do? Where is that place God is leading you to go? What is that crazy idea that you feel God is directing you in, and yet you're nervous, you're scared, you're fearful? I want to challenge you today to take that step, to make that move, to do that scary thing, knowing that God is leading you, and thus that is in fact the safest place you can be in all the world, right in the middle of God's will. We are safe in God's goodness. I pray as a church we would remain there, and that it would impact those that are around us as they see our faithfulness, and that our faithfulness might even impact those in our life. Amen.